let's talk about what not to do, which is what the majority of people do, which is asking, hey, what do you do? Like, to me, this is like the one question I would like to eliminate from people's vocabulary. When I want to get to know someone, I rarely ask a closed question. Like, I just want to have a conversation that ideally brings up memories or stories. In my mind, when somebody says the word icebreaker, I imagine the leader, the facilitator, walking into a room where everybody's frozen in ice, they can't move, and the leader's pulling out this huge sledgehammer. I like to call it ice melting rather than ice breaking, is because melting the ice is a gradual process.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Dhanda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Dear friend, thank you so much for joining me today on the Superpower School podcast. I'm your host, Paddy Dhanda, and on today's show, I have somebody who's got some deep, deep questions. So I'm kind of under pressure today. I hope I can ask equally deep questions, but we'll give it a go and we'll see. I'd love to welcome Jan Keck to the show. Hey, Jan, how you doing?
I am really good. And now I have the pressure to also ask you or ask some deep questions in this show. So the pressure is on for both of us.
Oh, that's going to be tough, isn't it? Well, we'll be good. We'll see. We'll see how we go. And Jan, I know your background is very much facilitation, but which superpower would you like to bring to this episode?
So I ran a couple of in-person workshops in the last couple of weeks. Some of them were related to using improv skills in like professional life or even in your personal life. And it's actually very similar to some of the work that I do in general, where I like to have people have an experience first. And somebody came up to me and said, you have this grounded confidence that just disarms people. And I think I'm just going to go with that because that is still kind of in the back of my mind from somebody telling me that after a workshop last week.
Oh, brilliant. So it's almost like you can win people's trust very quickly and then build that rapport. Is that the right way of thinking?
Yeah, I like where I want to go with a group is usually outside of people's comfort zone. If that is through the activities that we do, the conversations that we're having, and people having to share something, or not having to, but being invited to explore vulnerable topics and stories, you just need to get them to that point as quickly as possible. And I've somehow figured out, either by the way I am personally, but also some specific things that I do, to ease people into those types of moments.
And Jan, I know you've got quite a deep story, origin story. We were talking just off air about how you lived in Canada for a long time and now you're in Germany now?
Back in Germany where I grew up.
And so I'd love to know, like, how did you get into this world of facilitation? And at what point did you think this is an area that you'd like to explore?
For anybody who's been leading groups in one way or another, I think there's a time where you just do it. And then there's a transition where like, oh, people call that facilitating. And for me, the longest time, I just loved being a camp counselor when I was a teenager. I loved organizing experiences for people. I loved attending events and experiences. And it wasn't until way, way later, I want to say, like maybe in the last 6-7 years, where I discovered that that's actually a field that people, like there's education around it, there's courses around it, people teach it to others. And I think that's also where I started to find out, hey, there's something about the way I would run a workshop that seems to really resonate with people. Maybe there's something I can teach. And that's how I started then also teaching some facilitation skills. And now I am kind of in this world. Never, ever thought that I would end up here because also I didn't know it existed when I started out.
And what sort of workshops do you facilitate? Is it more tech, non-tech?
So maybe I can share how I got into also running workshops as a business, because to me in the beginning, especially when I moved to Canada, I didn't really know anyone. Like I knew one person from university that I crashed on her couch for the first few days while I was trying to find my own apartment. I was doing an internship with a documentary film production company because I thought I'm going to be a documentary filmmaker. But it was probably like 5-6 years after I had moved and then met my wife and decided to stay, where I had this epiphany moment at a weekend retreat around goal setting, where people come together and we set goals for the whole year, where I felt this deep sense of belonging to the people that I've literally just met 2 days before. And I just could not explain how I connected with these people so quickly. Whereas the week before, I probably went to 2 or 3 networking events and only walked out with a stack of business cards and didn't remember a single person. So something about that event and how it was facilitated kind of really changed my trajectory. Like to me, there is a before that retreat and my life after that retreat, because afterwards I went to try to re-engineer what were the elements that were present. And one of the things was people showed up with similar values. Like we all were interested in like personal development, goal setting, those types of topics. But the second and the really important thing is we were vulnerable together. Like everybody did something outside of their comfort zone, if that was actually part of an activity that we did, or just having a conversation that seems to be something you normally don't talk about. And I've had lots of those conversations on that weekend and then decided, okay, I need to do more of that. And the third part that was part of that experience was it was up north in Canada, or not that far up north, like a couple of hours north of Toronto, but far enough that I didn't have phone receptions. And I turned off my cell phone and all technology was like gone for the whole weekend. So there's no distractions. We could just focus on the conversations we were having. And that's how I started experimenting, hosting my own camping weekends. I started hosting workshops on how can we get beyond small talk experiences, helping people who arrived in Toronto and just wanted to make some more friends as adults. So a lot of the workshops I started doing were around how can we get beyond small talk to the real deep conversations and do that without feeling awkward or being put on the spot.
Oh, I love that. I can remember a similar scenario, probably not quite as deep as that one, but a few years ago, I was on a neuro-linguistic programming course, NLP, and a good friend of mine was running it, a lady called Kerry Nichols, and it was over 5 days, I think. And at the start of the week, we were complete strangers, never met any of the people on there. And similar to you, like as the week went on, I think every person pretty much cried at some point in that week. And it was just the way Kerry built psychological safety and the fact that everybody was just willing to share pretty much everything without any guard. And again, for me, it was a real masterclass in facilitation and setting the right environment for people just to express themselves and build that connection. Now, we live in a connected world because we've all got internet, we've all got mobile phones. We're more connected than ever, but as humans, we're not, right? I hear people say we're probably the most loneliest we've ever been. Have you got any thoughts on that? Like, why is that, do you think?
And this is kind of the epiphany I had after that weekend retreat. Although I wouldn't say I had no friends. Like I had friends and I was like meeting people and we're having conversations, but everything happened like on the surface level. Like I feel like I was having the same types of conversations, like, hey, what did you do on the weekend? And we would share what we did on the weekend. And then, hey, what are you going to do next weekend? And we share what we do next weekend. And then the conversation kind of fizzles out. It never goes to like the real meaningful topics. And even for myself, I realized it's too, I have to be so vulnerable to even bring up a different topic. Like that already was out of my comfort zone, that I didn't do it. Like I was afraid of being seen as, oh, why is he asking such weird questions? And I don't want to talk about this. I want to stick to my, I don't know, talking about sports and the weather and other small talk topics. And when you do this for a long time, you basically lose that skill. Like to me, this is really something you need to practice. And also you need to be able to find the right people who align with who you are. Like not everybody is going to be interested in those types of conversations, and understanding that that's okay was also a big lesson for me. Like when I go to a networking event now, usually my goal is not, I want to meet everybody in the room. I need to make sure I talk to like lots and lots of people, but maybe I find that one person that we just really click and we spend the rest, like the whole evening just talking about something. Or maybe it's a small group of people, but my goal is not to go for quantity, but for quality. Again, a skill that I think is not necessarily taught. And then unfortunately, we went through this big world event that just made us feel more disconnected, where we didn't have that in-person interaction anymore. And so many more people, especially around workplaces, like they're now doing remote work, they're doing hybrid work. And especially when you're just having back-to-back meetings virtually, like there is no time for those unplanned encounters and conversations, like on the way to the kitchen, around the water cooler. I don't really know how many offices actually have conversations around the water cooler anytime I think about it, but you get what I mean, right? It's those conversations where maybe you go for lunch with your coworkers and you talk about something else than business, but virtually it's like, no, the meeting starts at 8 and it finishes at 9, and then you have meetings. Okay, it's noon, everybody go for lunch. Hour later, everybody's back for the next meeting. There's no real time for it. And only few organizations that I talk to actually design experiences that help people connect. Because if you don't design it virtually, then it's just not going to happen. And again, we're not getting that practice, and it's not that easy for people to be open and vulnerable if you haven't built that connection and trust with someone.
And you mentioned there's some organizations almost design this approach to enable connection. Could you give us an example of that?
I mean, the best thing, especially if it's a remote company, is to find a reason for people to meet in person, at least maybe once a year or once every 2 years, depending on how distributed the team is. But I was working with one organization last summer, and they have a physical office where maybe 2/3 of the people work. But then there's a bunch of people who work remotely in like Italy and France and Spain. And some of them have never been to the office. They've never met their coworkers in person. And whenever you can get people together in the same room, there's a certain magic that happens that then will translate once you go back to the remote work environment. Like you can work, or you can move the relationships up much faster that way. So I would say the more you can make that a thing that is worth the investment, not all the time, but at least maybe once a year, it will keep you going. Like it will charge people's energy, this social energy up that gets you through at least a couple of months.
And I'd love to explore the small talk side of things, because as you mentioned there, a lot of people go to conferences, they use those experiences to network with people. And I'm always looking for new ideas of how you approach somebody to have that initial conversation. And I know you don't use the word icebreaker. So could you tell us a bit more about some of your hints and tips of how you can start that conversation initially?
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about what not to do, which is what the majority of people do, which is asking, hey, what do you do? Like, to me, this is like the one question I would like to eliminate from people's vocabulary. At least, let's say in the first 10 minutes of talking to someone. Like if you can get 10 minutes without asking that question, so you actually get to know the human first before you get to know them through their profession, then that's a huge win. Because aside from, like, I do lots of networking events with people who run their own businesses and entrepreneurs. And usually that's a group that loves what they do because they chose that, right, on purpose. But anywhere else, this might be people who don't like their job, and you're now putting them on the spot talking about something that they don't enjoy. And the more we can find questions that light people up when they share, and then kind of follow that path, the more likely we also get to find things we have in common. Ideally, again, we're not going to have things in common with everyone, but if I ask you a question that lights you up, and I kind of, with each question, I can direct it more, we might end up at a place where we both find our commonalities, where we connect on a deeper level. One thing that I actually do as an activity in my events is called the human search engine game, where one person gets to search the other person's collection of memories and experiences by typing a keyword into the search engine. So I might just type in networking event. What comes up? Okay, first thought when I hear networking event, like association, is maybe, oh, I went to this event last week and I met some people who traveled from Colombia. And at this point, I could double click on the word Colombia because I just heard that, because my wife is from Colombia. So maybe there's something that I can find we have in common. Double click on Colombia. What comes up there? Oh, yeah, we had this great conversation at the event. And then afterwards, we went for Colombian food and it was really amazing. Oh, food. What if I double click on food? What would come up then? And in a way, that's what I'm doing without calling it the human search engine game. I'm just looking for what lights people up and then ask a follow-up question about that. With each question, you go a little bit further. And yeah, that's like one strategy that I would apply.
I love that one, by the way, Jan. I might even steal that one. So I will let you know how it goes and attribute it to you for sure. And then we talked about going a little bit deeper, right? So I'm guessing if that's going well and the person's really opening up, they're lighting up, they're sharing more and more, how do you then make that transition into that more deeper mode of questioning? And what's your thoughts on open-ended questions versus closed? And when do you use either?
When I want to get to know someone, I rarely ask a closed question. Like I just want to have a conversation that ideally brings up memories or stories. I feel like that's how we connect as humans the most, is if we can find, the stories, things that people experienced, or maybe things that they want to create. One of my, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite questions to also ask at the beginning. But first, because you're not always the person who asks the first question, I want to share what to respond if somebody asks you, hey, what do you do? And you feel like, I don't want to answer that yet. Because I actually went to a networking event a couple of years ago. That was before I started working with organizations. And I was pretty new to the whole like HR world and industry. And a friend of mine wanted me to tag along. And he said, I'm going to introduce you to some people. They really need kind of what you're doing. And he ended up getting snowed in and didn't show up. But I was already at the event. So I said, you know what? I'm still going to go. But I don't want to talk about what I do because I couldn't really describe it well enough at that point in time. So when anybody asked me, hey, what do you do? I said, actually, I'm doing like a small talk detox right now. Do you mind if I ask you a different question? Everybody said, sure. Like nobody was like, no, I really want to know. And most of the time at one point we did touch on that topic again, but also with some people we didn't, and that was totally okay. But my question that I then ask people is, I want you to imagine that it's 1 year from today, like travel in the future, and we're meeting again with a bottle of champagne, with something to cheers. And I would love to know what's something that you're going to celebrate that you've accomplished in that year. And having people think about what those things are from, I ran this half marathon that I'm training on right now. And my daughter graduated high school, or finally that big project is done that we're working on in the organization. All of those things, people had a choice between going, is this something like a personal direction? Is this like business, professional direction? And they had the choice. And whenever people have the choice over how they answer, they're usually more likely to choose a honest and authentic answer to it. And we had some great conversations, including one person that we started this conversation waiting for food at the buffet, ended up sitting next to each other, chatted for like the whole evening, and at the end said, what would be funny if we actually met like 1 year from today? Let's put in our calendar right now and order a bottle of champagne and celebrate. And we pulled out our phones, we put a event in our calendars. And then I said something that I later regretted, but in retrospect, I think it was hilarious, which I said, wouldn't it be funny if we didn't talk for a whole year? And then we're not sure if the other person would show up, and we would have to trust that just on this one interaction, we will not be stood up. And we both said this would be a hilarious, funny idea. And we did not reach out. I did not send, hey, are we still on for next week or next month? Did not communicate at all. Ran into each other twice in that year just by randomness. Once I was crossing the street and he was standing there in the car at the red traffic light, and we just like wave and like, we're still on. Yeah. That was the whole conversation we had for the whole year. And then when the time came, I went to the restaurant, and luckily he did show up, and we had an amazing conversation. Completely forgot what we said we were going to celebrate. So if I gave some tips on if you were planning to do this in your calendar invite, write down the things that you were going to celebrate so you can check, did you actually do it? And then we realized we live in the same neighborhood. We hung out at a coffee shop in our neighborhood like every other week. Actually became really good friends. And if I think of what's a lesson from there, well, it was that one conversation that kind of started our relationship that lasted for a whole year without us talking, where we still remembered so much about it compared to all of the other conversations where I don't remember even after I leave the event and I go home. So the questions really matter, and the conversations, if they're deeper, they also create these lasting memories with people.
That got me to remember a point from last week. I was running a weekly catch-up with the team, and I thought I'd do things a little bit differently. And I just asked a very simple question. I said, as you're sharing some of your updates, can you also share something interesting from the week before? Oh my God, Jan. It was so difficult to get something out of people. And I think why that is because we put so much pressure on ourselves, right? To say something that's going to be really interesting, that other people are going to judge to be interesting. I mean, interesting could mean anything. Could be like, you know what? I had this really nice biscuit last week. That's interesting. Okay, let's deep dive on that. But it's almost like they're putting so much pressure on themselves to go, whoa, I can't think of anything interesting that I did, right? Because they almost have this competition then that, oh, well, that person said that, I've got to make mine even better.
You're 100% right. Like it becomes competitive very quickly in like, especially in a group scenario of people who already know each other.
Yeah. How can you combat that then? Is that a right or bad question then to ask someone, tell me something interesting?
I have two immediate thoughts. One is I would not put people on the spot in the moment for a question like that. I might give them a heads up a day before, like, hey, tomorrow have like one interesting thing that happened to you ready to share. Because there's something that happens when people have to think about something like that on the spot is, number one, you stop listening to everybody else's. You're in your head, and like we want people to connect with each other. Like that's the goal, right, of the activity. But if then we force them to not really listen to each other, then that's kind of the opposite result that happens. And the second thing is when you ask about something interesting, like you said, it automatically people go into this, I have to come up with the most interesting. If it's not more interesting than the last thing that was said, then people are going to make fun of me. Like there's no, it's tricky if it's not a group that is really supportive and has all of this trust. And like you mentioned psychological safety before, then that's where that becomes a little bit awkward. So maybe a different question could be, what's something really uninteresting that happened to you last week? And kind of lower the bar. And maybe it is, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like an interesting fact from me. We finished all the laundry for like half an hour before we put new clothes in the basket. I know it's not super interesting, and I think people can relate to that. But it still shared something. I'm not sure how much like people are really going to learn about each other that way. But at least the pressure is lower. And maybe the third tip I would give is whatever the first thing that is shared will set the tone for everybody else. So if the first person says, "Oh, I ran into Brad Pitt on the street," like, wow, how am I going to top that? Then the pressure is really on, and people are struggling to find anything to compete with that.
And the fact that you revealed something about yourself, I think that's really important, right? You mentioned there about the laundry, because then someone might say, "Oh, yeah, do you do the laundry?" And then you might say, "Well, only sometimes," or blah, blah, blah. But it's now starting to generate that conversation, and it can actually get people to talk. I really like the fact that it's the bar you set, right? And sometimes we do it without even thinking. I think this is where leaders can really learn a lot, because you often see these really high-powered leaders. They'll come into a meeting and they'll be like, "Right, everybody, I want you to do this or share this." And they have no idea that the impact of that statement on other people. So leaders, go on facilitation courses with Jan. You'll learn a lot. And Jan, I've heard you talk a lot about icebreakers. So what's your problem with icebreakers? Tell us more.
Yeah. Well, with the example that you just shared, there were like 3 little things that like this could have been described as an icebreaker. But more so, I started having this very strong visual whenever I hear the word icebreaker now, because the truth is, a lot of groups, when you say, "Hey, we're going to do an icebreaker," people start to cringe, they start to groan, like, "Oh no, not again," because they've had a bad experience with one of these activities that aren't necessarily bad. But in my mind, when somebody says the word icebreaker, I imagine the leader, the facilitator walking into a room where everybody's frozen in ice, they can't move, and the leader's pulling out this huge sledgehammer. And they're like, "Okay, I'm going to free you all from the ice that we're all frozen in." And they start like smacking on the ice and not really worrying if some people might get hurt. And some people are still frozen in the back. To me, that's what an icebreaker does. It is usually aimed at people who are maybe more extroverted, who love activities like this. And there's always a few people who are like, "Yes, I'm totally ready for something fun and different." But then there's the other group, and I would actually put myself in that group for most of my life as the quiet people, like the ones that might not be ready to share something in front of the group because maybe speaking in front of the group is uncomfortable. Maybe they just need more time to process when they get a question before they have an answer ready and they're willing to share. And especially if it's a group of strangers, we need to give them time to build that trust and connection before they're really opening up. And what we want the icebreaker to do is actually going to have that effect. And one of the reasons why I like to call it ice melting rather than ice breaking is because melting the ice is a gradual process. It takes a bit more time, but it is not as abrupt and violent and disruptive as coming in with a sledgehammer. And for me, like melting the ice is with a fire. And the reason, if anybody's watching the video, I have a campfire sparkling or burning behind me, is that the same thing with the way you start a fire is you can't expect a fire to start from just like lighting a big log. You need to start with your tinder, your paper, something that burns really easily, then add your little sticks, add your larger sticks, your kindling, and at the end you can put that big log on the fire and actually will create a big, nice campfire. But most of the time we just go for, we have to do this one icebreaker and that's going to solve all the problems. People will be connected, they'll be engaged, they'll be ready for everything else. And then we completely switch topics and we do the actual meeting. So it is, I think often something completely random and unrelated to why people are here, which is the other, or maybe the last reason that I'll share, because I'm going on a little bit of a rant here, is that often people complain about icebreakers because they feel like, why do I have to do this silly game? What does that have to do with this workshop that we're doing, this meeting that we're having? And it's actually very easy to come up with an activity that is related to the topic, that eases people in and helps them connect with each other and builds that trust and safety. And sometimes it's not just one activity, it's like a bunch of little things that add up to creating this. Because I think it's a bit naive to think that in like 5-10 minutes, we can achieve all of these goals that you have for this one activity. Often it takes.
I think you're the first person to talk about icebreakers and ice melters in that way. And I mean, I've heard you talk before on it, and I love the concept. I think it's a great way of looking at it because we're quite visual people, right? So as soon as you say a word like ice, we've instantly got this image now in our heads. And so it does plant that in your mind. So I'm going to break the rules a little bit and I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you tell us of a time where you had an epic fail in a workshop? And what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I'm glad that we're breaking rules and not ice, first of all. Epic fail. So there's one activity that I love doing, especially with strangers, that sometimes it's called spectrums, sometimes it's called extremes, but basically in person you would set up the room with like one end of the room on this wall is like one extreme, let's say people who love to drink coffee, and then on the other end is people who love to drink tea. And then people arrange themselves on that spectrum. So if they only coffee and love coffee, they would be all the way on this side of the wall. If they're like, well, I sometimes drink coffee and sometimes drink tea, they would be somewhere in the middle, but they can arrange themselves wherever they want. And to me, this is a very quick way to understand, for me, where a group is at on certain like personality traits, knowledge about a topic, experience about an issue that we're there to discuss. But I'm also always giving them the invitation to look out for the people who keep standing near you. Because with every question, people shuffle around the room. But if there's always somebody who's next to you, you have a lot of things in common with them. So find them later and have a conversation and explore that a little bit more. But the other thing that happens every once in a while is somebody will stand completely by themselves. Where everybody's on one side, they might be on the other. And some of those questions might be, like another extreme that I like to ask is, perfect evening is party night out or reading a book at home? And then people arrange themselves. Or like talking about introverts and extroverts, like how do you recharge after a long day? You need like alone time or like want to be around people? Like that's basically the same question, but I just phrased it slightly differently. And if somebody's standing all the way by themselves, it does kind of the opposite of what I designed the activity to do, which is help people find each other and connect. But suddenly they're standing out and they're feeling excluded from the rest of the group. And it happened once or twice before I started to almost expect that. Like I didn't necessarily remove the activity, but I now walk into a room knowing that at one point somebody will be standing by themselves. And the worst thing that you can do, and that's what I did in the beginning, is then put them on the spot and ask them why. So I, in that case, asked them a question like, what's a good book they would recommend? Because I said reading books at home. And they were not ready to be put on the spot. They were already feeling excluded. So I just made it worse. So now my approach is whenever somebody's standing alone, like acknowledge them for their courage to stand alone, because that is stepping outside of your comfort zone, especially early part in a workshop. I really want people to see, hey, this is what I want us to be able to do, is have that courage to also like be your authentic self, basically. So sometimes I would actually give them a prize and like bring some, when I facilitate in other countries, I always bring like German gummy candies that I would hand out for different games and activities. And I would just appreciate them, but not put them on the spot and quickly move on to the next pair of extremes.
It's so easy to sort of create that group think, isn't it? Sometimes when you're in an environment where there's lots of people and you don't want to be that person who's the odd one out, you can easily fall into that trap of going, well, I'm just going to go where everyone else goes. And so you're right. If somebody is standing on their own, that has taken huge courage, and they genuinely must be feeling quite strongly about that opinion of where they stood. So that's a really great way of looking at it. You mentioned there you've been to different countries and run sessions in other countries. Are there anything you've learned there about different cultures, different countries? Like, as a facilitator, are there any things I should be aware of then about other places outside of England for me?
I would definitely recommend either finding people in that country that you're going to facilitate and asking them about what they think the differences might be. Because for me, a lot of my work has been in North America, so Canada, US, and then I want to say Germany and UK as well. So those are like the areas that I feel like I have personal experience from. And I know for North Americans, it's a lot easier to be vulnerable than, let's say, for Germans. Actually, with people in the UK, I would probably also put them closer to the Germans than, like, let's say, North Americans. And at least in Germany, I know where part of that is coming from. In North America, I think the work of Brené Brown has shifted vulnerability, the word, as being seen more as a strength in certain environments. That has not really happened in Germany, at least. And even if you translate vulnerability to the literal translated word in German, I still describe it as, if you imagine being a knight with your armor covering all of your body except that one spot, that if somebody pokes you there, you're going to die, that is vulnerability. So why would you ever show that to someone that you don't know yet, right? So people are way more closed off in the beginning, and it takes a little bit longer to get people there. But I feel like once you have arrived, then they're way more open than, let's say, people in North America. Like in North America, in Canada, in the US, people are like, you'll notice this when you meet people. It's very quick to get into a conversation with somebody, like standing in line or hanging out, sitting on a bench in a park. You'll get into conversations quickly. They very quickly are like friendly conversations. They ask you questions. They might invite you to come over to their house for a barbecue, like very quickly. But then to get from that level to a really deep, meaningful, close relationship, I think that's where it slows down a lot more.
I think you're totally right. As Brits are more like the Germans, we're often quite guarded. But as you get further up north in England and then go up to Scotland, like the friendliness level just goes to another level. Like Scottish people are super conversational. They're really nice about just chatting to you, even if you're a random stranger. I don't know about vulnerability, though. That vulnerability, they might be probably just as hard as the English down south. But yeah, we'll have to test that one. And yeah, and a big question for me is, we're living in this age of AI. What do you think will be the impact on facilitation as a skill set? Like, is that something that you think is future-proof as a job? Should we be worried?
I think anybody who's not already using AI when you're facilitating or like preparing a session, or even like looking at the results of the session, analyzing the data, then I think you're going to be in trouble, because more and more people are using it. And it's, even for myself, saving me a lot of time. And sometimes just using, let's say, ChatGPT as a brainstorming partner or a way to practice role play scenarios. I don't think I could have found those like that support before as quickly. But when you're in a room with a group, I think that's where AI will not be able to like replace the skills that you have, that are about reading the room, about adjusting for the team dynamics, about hearing the tone of somebody's voice and then adjusting what you're going to do, or just this intuitive sense of reading the room and then changing, like, let's take a break. I feel like everybody feeling a little bit of stuck right now. Let's take a quick break, do an energizer, whatever you need to do to adapt. Like this improvising in the moment, the people who do it really well can do that for a group, and they can shift around all of the content and pieces without them ever knowing that you skipped something or that you changed plans. They just trust you to lead them. And I think that's some of the things that AI won't be able to replace.
It's really interesting. Just last night, I was having a chat with my good friend ChatGPT, and I asked it, if AI got like 1,000 times more powerful and more intelligent, describe how the world will be with AI being that intelligent, but then from the angle of facilitation. And it's quite interesting what it said. It was like, it was convinced we don't need facilitators anymore. And it was very much telling me AI will facilitate and it will do all this kind of stuff. And it was just a bit scary that it's telling me that. And I was like, no, don't say that. But anyway, hopefully not. Hopefully
Yeah,
not.
I'm just imagining a conflict in a group. Like, how would AI be able to handle that? Yes, it can maybe come up with phrases to use and activities that could be done, but are people willing to trust an AI facilitator enough that we're actually going to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Imagine when the AI says, let's do an icebreaker, and then everybody will walk out the room. But yeah, we'll leave that one there. Jan, we're fast approaching time, so I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions as we end the show. If you could have any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, something that really knocks you, what would that be? And if we did it for 24 hours, we'll run a little test.
I'm very tempted to say icebreakers, but I feel like I already did that rant earlier. So I'm going to pick something different, which is the phrase in virtual meetings, let's just wait until everybody's here. I would love to remove that phrase from people's vocabulary and have them think about how they start a session that sets up the session for engagement and rewards people for showing up on time rather than penalizing them for showing up on time, and just giving everyone this chance to multitask right at the beginning. Because whenever you do that, you're going to have such a hard time to get people's attention back. And it's such an easy, like, people are there, they're ready. So why do we have to wait for somebody else? Yes, there's some information that is, you don't want to share until everybody, like the majority of people are here, because otherwise you'll be repeating yourself. But I started implementing different activities and just asking a question, getting into the group knowledge to start a conversation about the topic that we're there to discuss. So it's not like it's this random thing, not like a random icebreaker, but maybe like when you hear like what's maybe a topic of a session, if it is around like a leadership training around giving feedback, maybe the question could be, when your boss tells you, I have some feedback for you, how do you feel? Share like a couple of feeling words and we'll create like a word cloud. Just get people start thinking, engaging with the content. And it's developing as more people come in, more words get added, some words get larger, some words get smaller. We can comment on it, we can discuss it. And then when everybody's there, like they've been engaging the whole time, they've not been multitasking, replying to emails, because once you start opening up the door for people like replying in emails in those first few minutes, how are you going to get them back when they're right in the middle of it? They're not going to be paying attention. So that's one thing I would love to use my superpower to remove, is that that start of sessions, and instead doing things like, a lot of people call it unofficial start activities. I like to call them spark activities, as they are the things that will ignite that fire that I talked about earlier.
Right, we're going to do that. I'm the worst for coming up on time, so I think I'm probably the biggest culprit there. So I'll have to definitely put my alarm clock on. And Jan, how can people get in touch with you to follow the great work you're doing? And I know you're almost at the end of your book journey. You're writing a book. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I am writing a book about the process of melting the ice. And that's also something that I share about in my newsletter every Monday. I'm like very proud that for the last, I want to say 20 months or something like that, I've been sending an email every week, which I never thought I would be able to commit for something for that long. But I haven't run out of ideas. And one of the reasons why I actually sent this weekly email out is because I want to test some of the content for the book. I want to get feedback. I want to make sure that it's relevant to people and it's not this whole idea that I have in my head that once I then put it out is like, oh, that's nobody thinks about these things except you. And then it's irrelevant. So there's lots of chances for people to give feedback on the book. And if you want to subscribe, it's icemeltersbook.com. And once you go there, that also brings you to my website and all of the other things that I create and offer.
Oh, fantastic. And I have to say, again, we were talking about this just before we kicked off. It's an amazing newsletter. I love it. I'm always looking forward to it. It really is like you talking as if we're having a conversation. That's what I love about it. There's some connection built within the newsletter, which is kind of ironic, but I don't know if you did that with purpose, but it certainly feels that way.
I can share the one secret for anybody who's writing newsletters. You can personalize it, right? Like most newsletters start with like, hey, Jan, if you're not already using that, highly recommend that you start using that at the beginning of the email. But I try to use it like 2 to 3 times within the email, where within a sentence, I just keep mentioning people's names, mostly because I picked that up from somebody else's newsletter that I love, Marsha Shandur from Yes, Yes, Marsha. She sends out newsletters about storytelling. She does that. And every time I read it, I'm like, she's speaking directly to me. And that's exactly the feeling that I want people to have when they're reading mine. And I wish I could send a personalized email to every person, but unfortunately I don't have that much time on my hands. But it at least makes it a bit more, aligned with my values than saying like, hey, everybody, and then talking to a whole group.
Oh, what a great tip. Thank you so much, Jan. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I feel like I'm a little bit wiser than I was at the start of this conversation. So really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited for sharing some of my rants around icebreakers and hope that more people will start melting the ice after this.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.